we'll go through Colonel Isaac Wing's life through Bayfield's kind of transformative era, 1880s, and a little bit after that, until his death in 1907. Susan Mackreth, she's another brilliant local historian in the area. And Washburn Area Museum's, very lucky to have her, Washburn Area Museum's curator. So you can find more information about Washburn Area Museums on the website, second floor of the Washburn Cultural Center. And she keeps it open Fridays and Saturdays in the afternoons. So, please welcome Sue Mackreth.
So, who was Isaac H. Wing? This is a question I have thought about for a long time. When I lived in Bayfield, I heard about him and I learned a little bit, but I never really got too much information in my brain about it. And most of the things that I learned about Bayfield, I learned from this museum here and the people from here. And if you look at this wondrous place here, doesn't mention anything about Isaac Wing. And so, okay. So I didn't know. And then when I became curator at the museum in Washburn, his name kept coming up. And I was saying, I thought he was a Bayfield guy. What's he doing down here? But his name kept coming up. And then I got a newsletter from the Port Wing Historical Society, and the cover story was on Isaac Wing and how the town was named after him. And then that was it. Not only did I now have more curiosity, I also felt stupid because I never made the connection between Isaac Wing and Port Wing. So it's been kind of this wondering question, and I have to thank Tricia for giving me this opportunity to finally sit down and figure out who was this guy. And I have to acknowledge some of the people who helped me on this. Mary Carlson, who wrote the book On the Streets of Bayfield, which if you don't have, I strongly recommend you get a copy of it. It's for sale here. Jim Bryant, who owned the Isaac Wing house for a while. Leanne Hess from the Port Wing Historical Society. Sherry Peterson, who wrote a very nice article on him, but way back in 1991 on Isaac Wing. And Lars Larson, who unfortunately is no longer around for me to thank, but he also did some research on it. So to begin, a good place to begin was, where was he born? Okay, he was born in Augusta, Maine in 1835, and he was born to a prominent family in Maine, actually in New England. His ancestors came to Massachusetts in 1640, and wasn't too long after that, they helped found the town of Sandwich on Cape Cod. And actually, the Wing family still lives in Sandwich, and they're very much involved with their past history, with their genealogy and such. So it was a prominent family, but somewhere along the line, his great-grandfather moved to Maine and established a branch of the family in Maine. And so that's where he was, in Augusta, but he was actually raised in this town of Winthrop, Maine, which somehow, when I look at this, it reminds me of Bayfield. Does it look like Bayfield to you guys too? Yeah. So that's where he was raised. And his father was in the leather business, a wholesale leather dealer. But he died when Isaac was only 8 years old. And frequently you hear these stories of when the father dies and it leaves a wife, and in this case, 3 children, because Isaac had an older sister and a younger sister. And as soon as the son is old enough, he goes to work because he's got to do something to help support the family. In this case, as soon as he was old enough, he went to the North Yarmouth Academy in Maine, which was established in 1814 and still exists. So he went to a college preparatory school. So apparently money was not a problem. And after he finished with the preparatory school, he went to Bowdoin College, which was established in Maine even before the academy. That was founded in 1794, and they had a number of important or notable alumni from there, including Longfellow and Hawthorne. They went to Bowdoin. But most recently, the celebrated alumnus is Zoran Mondowney. That was a surprise when I read that the current mayor of New York graduated from Bowdoin College in 2014, the same college that Isaac Wing had gone to. So you can see he was there in 1856. There's his name. And what it required to get into Bowdoin is pretty surprising to me. And I won't read the whole thing, just a selection, but these are the terms of admission. Candidates for admission into the freshman class are required to write Latin grammatically and to be well-versed in geography, arithmetic, 6 sections in Smith's algebra, Cicero's selected orations, the bucolics, 2 Georgics, 9 books of Aeneid, Virgil. That goes on for more things. And then, note bene, of particular attention to the writing of Latin is urged as essential to a suitable preparation for the college course. The examination in grammar of Greek and Latin languages, including prosody of both, and in writing Latin will be particular. How many other people who settled in Bayfield had that kind of an education and that background? I don't think too many. So he would have graduated in 1856, but unfortunately he became really ill late in the year, and he had to leave the college before the end of the semester. But 40 years later, 1896, Bowdoin College bestowed on him the degree, so he did graduate from Bowdoin College. So he somewhere between 1856 and 1859, he moved to the St. Croix River Valley to Hudson. I don't really know why. There was nothing as to why he left Maine and went there. It was being promoted, that area was being promoted strongly at that time. It was a growth area, mostly with lumbering, with logging and all. And that's actually who he worked for. He became an accountant for a lumber company there. But he also read law while he was there, and he was admitted to the bar in 1860. And he was elected a police judge at Hudson in 1861. Now, something else happens in 1861, which will kind of change the story. And so the Civil War breaks out, and Lincoln makes a call for volunteers, and Isaac Wing was one of the first to answer that call in Hudson. And he joined, it became Company G, or the 4th Wisconsin Volunteer Regiment, and he soon became a lieutenant. The unit did move around, it did see some action, but they weren't in any major battles before he got so sick. The condition of his lungs was such that he had to resign, and that was in August 20, 1862. So he was in for about a year and 4 months. So however short that might seem in comparison to the full 4 years, it will have future effects. William Hord served in the same unit, and when Hord became governor of Wisconsin in 1889, Wing served as a member of his military staff. And this is when he received the title of colonel, which precedes it, and almost any time he's written up in the newspapers ever afterwards. It's Colonel Isaac H. Wing. Oh yeah, and the H, I think that's probably because his father was also Isaac. So I think whenever he wrote his name, he always wrote Isaac H. Wing. So he goes back to Hudson, and he stays there for a number of years. And He's back in the St. Croix Valley, and he was appointed U.S. Commissioner to appraise Indian reservations in Wisconsin. So he's kind of starting to move around the northern part of the state. And he starts visiting Bayfield at this time. He visited several times, and it was usually noted in the newspaper. And this is a newspaper from an article on him in 1871. And let me read this. This is kind of interesting. The commissioners, and this is referring to this, as evaluating the land for the Indian reservation, and he had a partner. So the commissioners appointed to appraise the Stockbridge Reservation have completed their labors. We congratulate our friend Isaac H. Wing, Esquire, upon the termination of this portion of his labors, and shall look for his report with much interest. We congratulate him all the more because we have been assured by those acquainted with the nature of the lands, etc., that the obstacles these two commissioners had to encounter at the onset of their investigations were many, and we do not hesitate to say that no ordinary men could have surmounted the difficulties they had to meet. Take a little rest upon the banks of the St. Croix at your thriving town of Hudson, friend Wing, and then come up and show us the light of your cheerful countenance. Enjoy the scenery of this beautiful bay, which has always had such attractions for you, and revel to your stomach's content with a delicious broiled whitefish at Smith's Hotel. Don't the anticipations of the tempting morsels make your mouth water? This is on the front page of a newspaper. Now, the front pages that were devoted to the local tended to be gossipy, but really, this is like a friendly letter, and it kind of, what's going on here? So I looked a little bit more into it, and the editor of the Bayfield Press at that point was Hank Byfield. Hank Byfield was Sam Byfield's brother. Sam Byfield owned the newspaper. And Sam Byfield, or the Byfields, lived in the St. Croix Valley. So they were friends of Wing. So that's basically, it is a friendly letter. Sam Byfield was a big booster for Bayfield. He thought that it was going to be great and everyone should come here. So my own theory is that one of the reasons why Wing landed up here was because of Byfield. And I think he liked the place too when he visited it, but also I think that Byfield kept pushing, this is really great, this is really great. And so he came here, and he was appointed receiver of the United States Land Company in Bayfield. And this is what Bayfield looks like in those days. And he comes into town and he has this job, and very soon he builds his house. And so this is on First Street. And the reason why this is here, by the way, is because long after he died, it became a funeral parlor. And this is what it looked like then. So that's what this painting is of. But this is what it looks like today. It's the Isaac Wing Lodge. And you can see it, the house is still quite recognizable. They filled in the porch, but it's still there. So that's the Isaac Wing Lodge. So he entered into the lumbering business with Fred Fisher, a general store owner in Bayfield. They sold timber from their properties on the Bayfield Peninsula. With the arrival of the railroad in 1883, these properties really increased in value, and Wing sold some of his forested land for profit. And this newspaper quote from 1888, Wing made a sale between 3,000 and 4,000 acres of pine land located in the vicinity of Siskiwit Bay to Steele and Chapman of Saginaw, Michigan, for $65,000. So The Fisher and Wing partnership ended in 1889, but Wing had acquired multiple acres in towns and thousands of acres of pine lands. And the town lots were not just in Bayfield, but in neighboring towns such as Washburn. He had acquired lots in Washburn just as the Washburn was being created. In fact, one of the earliest buildings in Washburn was one that he had built, and it became the post office. But Wing did more than just sell property or sell land for profit. And when Washburn wanted to have a high school, the property they selected belonged to Wing. So he sold it to him for $2,000. This was in 1894. But then he bestowed upon them the sum of $2,000 to be invested in a perpetual endowment for a scholarship for an outstanding student of that year's graduating class. So the people in Washburn were pretty happy about that. And a few years later, they will want to have another school. And it also was on Wing's property. And so he just gave it to them this time. And the school board decided to call the building the Wing School in honor of Colonel Isaac H. Wing of Bayfield, who had been a great friend of education and who had done so much for the cause. The colonel was consulted, and in a letter to the board, he very urgently requested that another name be selected, adding that he believed it better policy to honor the name of some illustrious person who was not living. Accordingly, the name Garfield was selected. And so that's the Garfield School on the screen. That was, if you're interested, that was about where the Fat Radish is now. And it was torn down in the 1960s. So Wing also donated a lot of money here in Bayfield. He donated money and land to the Lutheran Church and to the Catholic Church in Bayfield. He donated 10 acres for the cemetery that's up the hill. And so we talk about the fish hatchery and saying R.D. Pike donated the land for it, along with other people, including Wing. Wing donated his land he owned near Pikes Creek for the state fish hatchery, as did William Knight and Charles Rudd. So he was involved in that too. And he was also invested in business. And when the Island View Hotel burned in 1887, a group formed to raise money to rebuild it because it was very important to the economy of Bayfield. And Wing contributed to this. Later, when the owners defaulted on the loan that had been raised in 1889, Wing stepped in and bought their interest and formed a company with R.D. Pike and others. So in the exhibit here, below where it says the captains of industry, there is a picture of the ledger book and a picture of the hotel. And actually, in the new exhibit on Pike, the actual ledger book is out there. And I thought at first that this was for after the hotel burned, when they raised money. But no, there was another problem because the owners of the hotel, of the Island View Hotel, defaulted on that loan that had been raised. And so this was 2 years later in 89. So at that point, Wing bought their interests and formed a company with R.D. Pike and Fred Fisher and all. And this is mentioned here, and it says that, since it's an exhibit on Pike, it talks about Pike and says his name, he makes 3 different buying of stock in this company. Well, that's fine, but it still didn't match at all what Isaac Wing bought. I mean, if you look there, you can see Isaac Wing is H. Wing, 4,350 shares, and then R.D. Pike is 3,000 shares less. And he buys more, but so does Wing. So essentially, he was rich and he was generous. So now there are other acts of civic concern unrelated to business or real estate. In July of 1888, he provided the Bayfield Fire Department with uniforms and equipment, and thereafter they called themselves the Wing Hose Company. And when the Spanish-American War broke out or began in 1898, President McKinley called for volunteers, and there was a Civil War veteran in Washburn who answered that call and organized a group of men. And so he had 115 men, and Wing provided them with blue flannel shirts. And this is a quote: "Across the front of each shirt, the ladies of Washburn caused a white satin ribbon to be placed bearing the words 'Wing Guards.' When they performed their first military drill, the Washburn Times reported that the boys gave many rounds of cheers for the generous old gentleman whose name they have adopted." So, and then he continued doing things like this. In 1905, oops, I forgot to show you guys the eyes. Oh, all right. Allow me to mess up here and make a go backtracking, because this is really funny. This is the Island View Hotel that Wing managed to save twice. And what the heck are those guys doing? We have the picture there and we have the picture in that room, and I never noticed it. And when my husband was helping me put this program together, he noticed those two guys sitting in the window. So that's why I had to go back, even though it was out of order. Sorry about that. So anyway, getting back to our story. So he gets a letter from a woman in Port Wing asking if he would donate money for them to buy a church bell. And Wing replied that he would, and the bell should be as heavy as the tower would support. And so this brings us to the whole story of Port Wing. Why is it Port Wing? And the Port Wing Historical Society lady said what she had thought was that it was because he helped them get money to improve the harbor at Port Wing. And this was federal money. It was part of a bill in Congress. And that makes sense to me because Wing spent most of his winters in Washington, D.C. It was partly because of health. He needed to avoid our weather. But he also, he hung out with the senators and the congressmen, and he had close friends there. He was very, very close friends with our Senator Spooner. And so this was a bill being debated in Congress, so it's a good possibility that he did lean on people. He was very active in the Republican Party. He never wanted to hold office, but he promoted people he thought were good, and he promoted ideas. So this made sense to me. But I also read newspaper articles where it was still being debated. There was a senator in Montana who was filibustering the bill, and it died. And the newspaper article is saying this would have included money for Port Wing. So it was already being called Port Wing. So I'm not sure why. The only thing I can say in my favor, the Wisconsin Historical Society has a book on the names of Wisconsin, and they didn't know either. They said they thought it was going to be called Flag River because of the flowers in the river. So I don't know. I think he obviously was active in Port Wing. He owned the land that the quarry was on, and he said maybe there were several attempts to get money for the harbor, and he certainly would have promoted that, I think, if he had an opportunity. So the question is still out. I don't really know exactly why it is called Port Wing. So, what did he do for fun? I mean, I'm sure it was enjoyable to give away money, but still, what was the recreation? And he did like Bayfield very much. And he hunted, he camped, and he fished. He especially fished. And wait, I want to go back here. So, the fishing, I have an interesting little lighthearted newspaper article on that. And now the paper is being written by Curry Bell. This is reported in 1885 in the Bayfield County Press. Captain Pike, Major Wing, Commodore Chapman, and Admiral J.E. Grover, with a full fleet in tow of the tug Favorite, visited Sand Island Wednesday and engaged in a great naval battle with the brook trout fleet. They came out of the conflict victorious. So he did fish quite a lot. In fact, when Joe Chapman died, he left him his tackle because the two of them used to fish a lot together. He also traveled. He would go back to New England and visit his family, and he'd been doing that for years. And in, I think, what year was it? In 1886, he went on a lengthy trip to Alaska with friends from Hudson. And he also traveled outside the country. He actually got a passport. I was surprised to see this too. He got a passport in 1896 and off to Venezuela. And so this is 1896, and he's going to go to Venezuela. And by the way, it says the land of disputed territory. Why? Well, it sounds a little too familiar. And apparently it was a border dispute between Venezuela and Guyana. And lo and behold, President Grover Cleveland invokes the Monroe Doctrine and gets involved to help settle this. So that's why they're talking about disputed territory. But so I think he was just going because he was going. And it was purely a pleasure trip with the colonel, but taken in hopes of benefiting his somewhat impaired health, a long trip. And this picture from BHA, there was no identification. And like Tricia was saying, do I know where it's from? Well, at this point, I think I do. Because besides going to Venezuela, on the way, he stopped at the Bahamas. And so I think this is probably the Bahamas. He looks about the right age. He was 63 at the time. So he went to the Bahamas and the Windward Islands and to Venezuela at that time. So unfortunately, though, you can only stave off sickness and death for so long. And he died in his home in Bayfield on August 27th, 1907. His body was cremated and the ashes were buried in the family plot in Maine, in Winthrop, Maine. And that's the graveyard in Winthrop, Maine. And that's his grave. So there were many obituaries for him in the various cities he had affected. But this is the one from the Washburn Times. From the early 70s, his name has been closely coupled with everything pertaining to the development of Bayfield County and the city in which he lived. During this time, he attained a great deal of this world's goods. And there are hundreds of people who lived about him that can testify to his noble acts of generosity. Almost every church society has been made the beneficiary of Colonel Wing's benevolence, while private people in life have time and again found an unexpected friend through him. So today, his name and actions live on. The Wing Scholarship is still given to outstanding graduating scholars at the Washburn High School. The church bell is still rung in Port Wing. And in 1906, a year before he died, Isaac H. Wing gave $50,000 to the Bowdoin College to endow a chair of mathematics. Bowdoin still has an Isaac Wing professor of mathematics. This is off their current webpage. So I think, I kind of I feel like I've answered my question as to who is Isaac Wing, and I hope I've brought him alive for you two also. Thank you very much. Yes?
Many of you know I have generations of women before me who have been coming to Bayfield off and on throughout the years since the 1880s. My mother had written up a very extensive history of her side of the family. And when I found out the Isaac Wing program was coming on today, I know my grandmother was very close to him, and I know he had taken her under his wing in many respects. She was, her mother and my grandmother spent a lot of time in Bayfield, part of that time out at what is now Heinerston. So I dug out all of the paperwork this morning. It turns out that he did indeed leave about $20,000 to my grandmother.
Oh, really? Wow.
Catherine Rittenhouse.
Yes.
And she was able to attend Stanford College.
Yes. And they said Charles Rittenhouse was the executor of the will.
Right.
Yes, right. Naturally, you would expect with a rich man dying, there was a lot of interest in his will. And there are a number of newspaper articles about it. A large percentage of it was in stocks and bonds, so that kind of varied. And I think the final amount was something like $600,000, something like that. And the newspapers also made a big deal about, he left money to this young woman who was the daughter of a woman he had loved and wanted to marry, who married someone else. And the name they gave wasn't Fuller, it was Rittenhouse. I still am doubtful about the romance part of it. I think it was strictly good friends.
It was humorous because my mother, through this whole write-up, was, we really don't know. We really don't know. But the implication was he cared about young people, for sure.
Yes.
He cared about education.
Very much.
And he wanted to support it. So.
Yes, I think that sums it up beautifully. Thank you very much, because the newspapers wanted to go to the more salacious view of it and such, and I just couldn't buy that. I didn't see any evidence, and this kind of supports it. Yes, he was interested in the future generations very much, that they would be able to succeed, and he was very interested in education, and that's great that she used it to go to college. So thank you very much. And thank you all for coming. And I hope that you enjoyed the program.